The wind carried a sound no one in the valley had heard for nearly 15 years. A church bell, not a joyful peal, not a warning. Just one slow, lonely strike that echoed through the pine-covered mountains before fading into the endless sky. Most folks in the high country believed the abandoned church had surrendered to time long ago. Its roof sagged beneath winters of heavy snow. Its windows had surrendered their glass to storms and wandering hands. Even the trail leading to it had nearly disappeared beneath wild grass, yet someone or something had rung its bell. Nearly 20 miles away, a young woman paused beside her wagon as the distant echo drifted across the valley. She lifted her head. The horses did the same. For a brief moment, the entire wilderness seemed to hold its breath. Clara Whitmore had traveled farther than she ever imagined a person could. The rolling fields of Missouri were now only memories carried in the pages of letters tucked safely inside her satchel. Those letters had convinced her to leave everything behind. Each one had come from the same man, Elias Harper, a rancher living somewhere beyond the Granite Ridge Mountains. His words had been steady, kind, and honest. He never promised riches. Never painted impossible dreams. He simply wrote that the land was beautiful, lonely, and large enough for someone willing to build a life instead of searching for an easy one. He had asked if she would become his wife. She had answered yes. Now, after nearly 6 weeks of dust, rivers, broken wagon wheels, restless nights, and endless trails, Clara had finally reached the country he called home. Only, nothing looked as she expected. The mountains rose like ancient guardians beneath clouds heavy with coming rain. Tall pines crowded the slopes. Crystal streams cut through fields of waving grass. The land was breathtaking. But it also felt strangely empty. Too empty. No distant smoke from ranch houses, no cattle grazing, no laughter carried by the wind, only silence. The kind of silence that made travelers question whether someone was quietly watching from the trees. Clara glanced toward the folded map Elias had drawn by hand. She should have reached his ranch before sunset. Instead, the trail simply vanished. She frowned. This can't be right. Her voice disappeared into the open wilderness. She climbed down from the wagon and studied the ground. Old wagon tracks, faint horse prints, then nothing, almost as if the earth itself had swallowed the road. The horses grew restless. One stamped the ground, the other pulled gently against its harness while staring toward the dark forest. Clara followed its gaze. Between the trees stood what looked like a weathered wooden sign. She walked closer. Most of the lettering had faded. Only 3 words remained. Turn back now. She swallowed. The wood looked old, years old. Yet someone had recently driven a fresh knife deep into the post. The blade still gleamed. She quickly stepped away. No, she whispered to herself. I've come too far. She returned to the wagon, though unease settled quietly in her chest. As evening approached, clouds rolled over the mountains. The first drops of rain began falling. Within minutes, the sky unleashed a cold mountain storm. Thunder rolled across the ridges. The narrow trail turned slick beneath the wagon wheels. One wheel struck a hidden rock. A loud crack split through the rain. The wagon lurched violently. Clara lost her footing and fell into the mud. One frightened horse reared. The broken wheel collapsed completely. The wagon leaned sharply to one side. She scrambled toward the horses, speaking softly until they calmed. When the storm eased, she stood alone beside the crippled wagon. No shelter, no nearby ranch. No idea where Elias lived, only miles of darkening wilderness. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself. Then she noticed something, smoke not from a chimney, a campfire. Far up a distant hillside, it flickered only once before disappearing behind the trees. Relief washed over her. Someone lived nearby. She gathered her lantern and started climbing the narrow slope, leaving the broken wagon behind. Branches scraped against her sleeves. The forest thickened. Twilight settled quickly beneath the towering pines. Every few steps she stopped, searching for the faint glow she had seen. Nothing, only darkness. Then, hoofbeats, slow, measured, behind her. She turned sharply. No one. The sound stopped. She continued walking. Again, hoofbeats, closer. She spun around. Still nothing, only mist drifting between the trees. Her breathing quickened. The lantern trembled in her hand. "Who's there?" Silence. Then came another sound, not a horse this time, a child laughing, soft, far away, almost carried by the wind itself. Clara froze. There were no settlements marked anywhere nearby. No families, no cabins, nothing. The laughter ended as suddenly as it had begun. A cold breeze swept through the forest. Her lantern flame flickered wildly, then went out. Darkness swallowed everything. Only the faint outline of the trees remained beneath flashes of distant lightning. Another flash revealed something standing 30 yards ahead. A rider, tall, motionless, watching her. Before she could speak, darkness returned. The next flash came only seconds later. The rider was gone. In his place stood an old wooden cross planted beside a narrow trail she had somehow failed to notice before. Hanging from the cross was a single leather pouch. Inside lay one folded piece of paper. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it. The message contained only 6 words. "You're already too late, Miss Whitmore." Rainwater dripped from the brim of Clara Whitmore's hat as she stared at the message. "You're already too late, Miss Whitmore." The words were written in neat, careful handwriting, not hurried, not angry. Whoever had written them had expected her to find this exact place. A chill crept through her. How could a stranger know her name? Only a handful of people knew she was coming west. Even fewer knew the route Elias Harper had marked on his hand-drawn map. She looked around, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious rider. Nothing. The forest stood silent beneath the fading storm, its towering pines swaying gently in the cold wind. Water trickled from the branches, and somewhere in the darkness an owl called once before the woods fell quiet again. Clara folded the note and slipped it into her satchel. Running blindly into the trees would accomplish nothing. She forced herself to think. Someone had left that message recently. The leather pouch was dry beneath the overhanging cross despite the rain. Someone had been here, perhaps only minutes earlier. She raised the lantern, striking flint until a small flame returned. The light revealed something she hadn't noticed before: fresh horse tracks. Only one horse? The rider had approached from the narrow trail beside the cross and disappeared deeper into the mountains. Clara hesitated. Following an unknown rider through unfamiliar wilderness after sunset sounded foolish. Returning to the broken wagon meant spending the night alone in the open. Neither choice felt safe. Then she noticed another detail. The tracks weren't hurried, the horse had walked. Whoever left the message hadn't been fleeing, almost as if they wanted her to follow. She tightened her grip on the lantern and stepped onto the hidden trail. The path wound through dense forest where moonlight barely touched the ground. The farther she walked, the quieter everything became. No birds, no insects, only the steady crunch of damp leaves beneath her boots. After nearly half an hour, the trees began to thin. A wide meadow opened before her. Silver mist drifted across tall grass, glowing beneath the rising moon. Near its center stood an old cabin. Its chimney released a thin ribbon of smoke. Warm light flickered behind one window. Relief flooded through Clara. At last, she hurried toward the porch and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, still silence. Yet she could hear the fire crackling inside. Slowly, the door creaked open on its own. "Hello," she called. Nothing. The cabin appeared recently occupied. A kettle hung above glowing coals. Fresh bread rested on a wooden table. A coffee cup still steamed. Someone had stepped away only moments ago. "Is anyone here?" Again, no reply. She took one cautious step inside. The room was simple but orderly. A rifle rested above the fireplace. 2 saddles leaned against the wall. Several animal pelts had been carefully folded beside a sturdy rocking chair. Everything suggested its owner valued hard work more than comfort. Then Clara noticed something that stopped her cold. On the table lay one of Elias Harper's letters, her letter. The very first one he had mailed to Missouri. She recognized the pressed blue flower she had tucked inside before sending her reply. Her heart pounded. How had it ended up here? Someone had opened the envelope. Read every page. Before she could gather her thoughts, the cabin door slammed shut behind her. She turned sharply. A deep voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't touch another person's mail," Clara gasped. A man stood just inside the doorway. Rain glistened across his dark coat, his broad shoulders nearly filled the entrance. One hand rested calmly near the holster at his side, though he made no move to draw. His face was weathered by years beneath mountain sun and winter snow. A faint scar crossed one cheek. His beard was trimmed short, his eyes, they were steady, gray as storm clouds. Quiet, observant, the kind of eyes that seemed to notice everything while revealing almost nothing. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally Clara gathered herself. "I'm looking for Elias Harper." The man's expression didn't change. "I figured you know him." "I did." The answer landed heavily. "Did not do not know." Clara felt the room tilt. "What does that mean?" The stranger removed his hat, setting it carefully beside the door before answering. "It means you're a long way from home. I asked if you know where he is." "I heard you." His voice remained calm, almost painfully calm. "Then answer me." For the first time something flickered across his face, not anger, regret. "He never met the stagecoach." Clara blinked. "What? He was riding east 6 weeks ago, the day before I left. He planned to meet your wagon outside Red Bluff. He never arrived." Her stomach tightened. "No, he wrote me. I have every letter. He promised. I know what he promised." The stranger's voice softened. "I buried his horse." Silence filled the cabin. The fire cracked softly. Outside, rain tapped against the roof. Clara searched the man's face, hoping to find uncertainty. Instead, she found quiet certainty. "No," she whispered. "You're mistaken. I wish I was." She backed away until the edge of the table pressed against her. Her entire journey, every mile, every hope, every dream gone with a single sentence. Tears blurred her vision. "I don't believe you." "I wouldn't either." The stranger walked toward the fireplace and picked up a folded leather map. He laid it gently on the table. Beside it rested a silver pocket watch. Clara recognized it immediately. Elias had sketched the watch in one of his letters after explaining it had belonged to his father. She picked it up with trembling hands. Inside the cover were the initials EH. Her knees weakened. She sank into the nearest chair. The room became painfully still. After several moments she finally asked, barely above a whisper, "Who are you?" The man looked into the fire before answering. "My name's Nathan Cross." He paused. "I was Elias Harper's closest friend." Another silence followed. Then Nathan added something that unsettled her even more. "And whoever left that message for you," he glanced toward the dark window, "is the same person who made sure Elias never reached that stagecoach." Clara looked up sharply. "You know who did it?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "I know why." Before Clara could ask another question, a sharp crack echoed outside. Both of them turned toward the window, a rifle shot. The cabin's front lantern exploded into a shower of glass. Darkness rushed across the porch. Nathan reacted instantly. He blew out the fireplace lamp, pulled Clara down behind the heavy table and listened. Another shot tore through the wall, burying itself in the log beside them. Nathan's voice dropped to a whisper. "They found you?" The cabin fell silent again. Somewhere beyond the trees, a horse snorted, then another. There wasn't just one rider outside, there were several. The cabin held its breath. Only the fire's dying embers cast a faint orange glow across the rough-hewn logs. Clara crouched beside Nathan behind the heavy oak table, her heartbeat pounding louder than the rain dripping from the roof. Outside, another horse shifted its weight. Leather creaked. Someone whispered. Nathan slowly reached beneath the table and pulled out a short, double-barreled shotgun. He checked it with practiced hands before quietly handing Clara a small revolver. She stared at it. "I've never fired one. I hope you still won't have to." His voice remained low and steady. "If anything happens, stay behind me." Clara nodded, though her fingers trembled around the grip. Nathan slipped toward the side window, lifting the corner of the curtain no more than an inch. He looked for only a second before letting it fall. "Four men, you know them." "I know the kind. What do they want?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he listened. Then he whispered, "They're not here to rob us." A hard knock echoed through the cabin. 3 slow raps, then silence. Another knock. A man's voice called from outside. "Nathan?" It sounded almost friendly. "We know she's inside." No reply. The voice continued. This doesn't concern you, Nathan's jaw tightened. It concerns me now, the man outside chuckled. Still making the same mistake. Another voice joined him. Hand over the girl and we'll ride away. Clara looked at Nathan in disbelief. They're after me, he nodded once. They've been waiting for you longer than you realize. She wanted to ask why, but another shot splintered the front porch railing. Nathan moved quickly. He crossed the room, lifted a narrow rug, and revealed a wooden trapdoor in the floor. Clara blinked. A tunnel, an old escape route. Go, what about you? I'll slow them down. I'm not leaving you. His eyes met hers. For the first time since they had met, the calm in them gave way to something fiercer. If they catch you, everything Elias died protecting disappears. The words struck her harder than the gunfire. Elias died protecting what? Nathan hesitated. Before he could answer, an axe slammed into the front door. The cabin shook. Another blow, wood cracked. Nathan opened the trapdoor. Move! Clara climbed into the narrow passage, but before Nathan closed it, she grabbed his sleeve. Promise me you'll come, he gave the faintest smile. I always keep my promises. The trapdoor shut above her. Darkness swallowed the tunnel. The passage smelled of damp earth and old pine roots. Clara moved carefully, lantern in one hand, revolver in the other. Above her, muffled crashes echoed through the ground. The cabin had been breached. She forced herself forward. The tunnel twisted beneath giant tree roots before climbing toward another wooden hatch. She pushed. Fresh night air rushed inside. She emerged behind a rocky hillside overlooking the valley. Nathan's cabin sat nearly 200 yards away. From her hiding place, she could see shadows moving around it. 4 riders, one remained mounted while the others searched inside. She looked desperately for Nathan. Nothing. Then a figure burst from the back of the cabin. Nathan, he sprinted toward the trees. Gunfire erupted. Bullets kicked dirt around his boots. Without breaking stride, he disappeared into the forest. The riders gave chase. Within seconds, the clearing fell silent again. Clara remained frozen. He had led them away from her. Exactly as he intended. She wanted to run after him. Instead, she remembered his final words. Everything Elias died protecting. Whatever that meant, it mattered enough for Nathan to risk his life. She pulled herself together and studied the valley. The moon now shone through broken clouds. Its pale light revealed a narrow trail leading north. Beside it stood a weathered stone marker. Someone had carved a symbol into its surface, a hawk, the same hawk Elias had drawn in the corner of every letter he sent her. He once explained it was the mark his father used to identify hidden supply trails through the mountains. Hope stirred inside her. Perhaps Elias had left something behind. She hurried toward the marker. Behind it, hidden beneath loose stones, she found a small iron box. Her breath caught. The lock had already been broken. Someone else had searched it. Inside lay only one folded map and a tiny brass key. No money, no documents, no explanation, only a note in Elias' unmistakable handwriting. If you're reading this, trust Nathan. Even if I cannot explain why. Clara clutched the paper to her chest, tears welled in her eyes. For the first time since arriving in the mountains, she no longer doubted Nathan. Elias had trusted him with his life. She would have to do the same. A twig snapped behind her. She spun around, revolver raised. An elderly woman stood a few steps away, wrapped in a dark wool shawl. Her silver hair escaped beneath a worn bonnet, and a mule grazed quietly behind her as if nothing unusual had happened. The old woman didn't seem frightened. She seemed disappointed. So, she said softly, studying Clara, you finally found his map. Clara lowered the revolver slightly. Who are you? My name is Margaret Boone. She glanced toward the distant cabin where smoke still drifted into the night sky. I warned Elias this day would come. You knew him? I knew his father first. Margaret's weathered face carried decades of mountain hardships, yet her eyes remained sharp. She looked at the brass key in Clara's hand. Did he leave you the key? Clara nodded cautiously. Margaret sighed. Then there's no turning back now. What does it open? The old woman looked toward the dark outline of the mountains. Not what, she corrected herself quietly. Who? Clara frowned. I don't understand. You will. Margaret stepped closer. The key belongs to a place almost everyone believes is empty. The abandoned church. Clara's heart skipped. The bell, Margaret nodded. It wasn't ringing by itself. Before Clara could ask another question, hoofbeats thundered across the valley, fast, closing the distance. Margaret's expression changed instantly. They're coming back. Clara looked toward the trail. The 4 riders had returned, but now there were 6. Nathan was nowhere among them. One rider pointed directly toward the hillside. They've seen us. Margaret grabbed Clara's arm with surprising strength. This way, the 2 women hurried into a narrow passage between towering boulders as rifle shots echoed through the night. They had almost reached the shelter of the rocks when a bullet struck the stone inches from Clara's shoulder, sending sharp fragments flying. She stumbled. The brass key slipped from her hand. It bounced once, twice, then disappeared into a deep crack between the rocks. Both women stared in horror. Behind them, the riders were almost upon them. The brass key vanished into the narrow crack with a faint metallic clink. For one terrible heartbeat, neither Clara nor Margaret moved. Then the hoofbeats grew louder. "Leave it," Margaret cried. "I can't," Clara answered. "Elias died for it." She dropped to her knees, reaching into the dark crevice. Cold stones scraped her arm as her fingers searched desperately through damp earth and loose gravel. Nothing. Another rifle shot cracked through the canyon. A bullet shattered the rock above them, showering both women with stone chips. Margaret grabbed Clara's shoulder. "They're almost here." Clara reached one last time. Her fingertips brushed something cold. She hooked it with 2 fingers and pulled. The brass key slid free just as another bullet struck the ground where she had been kneeling. Margaret didn't wait. She seized Clara's hand, and together they disappeared into the twisting passage between the towering rocks. The canyon narrowed until even moonlight struggled to reach the floor. High walls of granite rose on either side, their surfaces carved by centuries of wind and water. Behind them, the riders reined in their horses. "This way's too tight," one man growled. Another answered, "They can't stay in there forever." Their voices echoed through the stone corridor. Nathan had once described these canyons in one of Elias' letters. They were a maze known only to trappers and mountain men. A wrong turn could leave a traveler wandering for days. Margaret moved through them without hesitation. "You've been here before," Clara whispered, "for nearly 40 years. Who are those men?" Margaret's face hardened. "They work for the richest man in these mountains." She stopped beside a narrow opening hidden behind hanging vines. Inside, the opening led into a small cavern. It was dry, hidden. Almost invisible from outside, Margaret lit an oil lamp resting on a nearby shelf. The soft light revealed shelves carved into the stone, blankets, dried meat, water barrels, old journals. Someone had prepared this place long ago. Clara looked around in amazement. "You've been hiding here when necessary." Margaret sat heavily on a wooden stool. "I prayed I'd never need this refuge again." Clara placed the brass key on the table. "Please, no more half-truths, tell me everything." The old woman remained silent for a long moment. Then she reached for one of the journals. Its leather cover had nearly worn away. Inside were faded maps, handwritten names, and careful sketches of the surrounding valleys. Margaret turned to the first page. At the top was a single name, Samuel Harper, Elias' father, Clara whispered. Margaret nodded. "He wasn't just a rancher. He helped build these settlements when this country was still wild. He knew every trail, every river crossing, every hidden valley." She turned another page. Several names had been crossed out, others had stars beside them. "What is this? A record of families fleeing the violence farther east. They came here with nothing. Samuel gave them land, helped them start over." Clara smiled faintly. "That sounds like Elias. He learned from the best." Margaret's expression darkened. "But kindness creates enemies." She pointed to another name written across the page, Silas Granger. "You've never heard of him." Clara shook her head. "You've seen his work. The warning sign, the riders, the abandoned ranches, the empty valley." Margaret closed the journal. Silas Granger wants every acre of this mountain. He buys what people will sell and takes what they won't. He drove dozens of families away. Some disappeared. Others simply fled. Elias refused, so did Nathan. Clara's eyes widened. That's why they're being hunted, Margaret nodded, but the land isn't what Granger truly wants. She picked up the brass key. This is, Clara frowned. A key to what? Margaret held it beneath the lamplight. Years ago, Samuel Harper hid something inside the old church. Not gold, not silver, something far more valuable. What? The original land deeds. Clara stared at her. The real ownership papers? Margaret nodded slowly. Every forged claim Granger has made would collapse if those documents became public. A heavy silence settled over the cave. Suddenly everything made sense. The warning, the pursuit, the letters. Elias hadn't invited Clara West merely to marry him. He had trusted her to carry on something much larger than either of them. Before Clara could speak, footsteps echoed outside the cave. Both women froze. Margaret extinguished the lamp. Darkness swallowed the room. The footsteps stopped just beyond the hidden entrance. Someone breathed quietly on the other side of the vines. Clara wrapped both hands around the revolver. Her heart pounded. The vines slowly parted. A shadow entered. Clara raised the weapon. Don't, Nathan's voice. She lowered the revolver with a gasp. He stepped into the cave, exhausted and covered in mud. One sleeve of his coat was soaked with blood. Nathan, I'm all right. You've been shot, only grazed. He leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Margaret relit the lamp. The wound along Nathan's upper arm was shallow but bleeding steadily. As Clara cleaned the cut with fresh water, Nathan remained remarkably still. You led them away, they nearly caught me, but not quite. Despite everything, he smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had seen from him, small, tired, honest. You shouldn't have come back, Clara whispered. I said I'd keep my promise. Their eyes met. For a brief moment, neither spoke. The silence carried more than words ever could. Margaret quietly looked away, giving them the privacy neither had expected. Finally, Nathan noticed the brass key on the table. You found it, and nearly lost it again, he exhaled in relief. Good, because we don't have another. Clara looked at him. So it's true. The church holds the original deeds, Nathan nodded. It does, and Granger knows it. Then why hasn't he taken them already? Nathan's face grew serious. Because the church isn't empty. Before Clara could ask what he meant, the distant sound of a bell echoed through the mountains, one slow strike. Exactly like the one she had heard when she first entered the valley. Nathan closed his eyes. No, Margaret stood abruptly. They opened it. Nathan grabbed his rifle despite his injured arm. We're too late. What happened? Clara asked. Nathan looked directly at her. The bell only rings when someone opens the church. He paused. And only one person alive knows where the deeds are hidden. Clara glanced between Nathan and Margaret. Who? Nathan answered quietly. My father. Clara stared at him, unable to speak. You told me Elias' father was dead. Nathan looked toward the cave entrance, his voice filled with a mixture of guilt and urgency. I said Samuel Harper disappeared. I never said they found his body. Outside, another bell strike rolled across the valley. This time it was followed by a distant gunshot. Nathan's face turned pale. If Granger reached him first, he didn't finish the sentence. None of them needed him to. The second gunshot echoed through the mountains, then faded into a silence that felt heavier than the storm clouds gathering above the valley. Nathan was already moving. He shrugged back into his coat, ignoring the fresh blood seeping through the bandage Clara had tied around his arm. Margaret stepped in front of him. You can't fight 6 men in your condition. Nathan checked the rifle's chamber. I don't plan to. Then what's your plan? Get Samuel out before Granger finds the deeds. He looked at Clara. You don't have to come. For the first time since she had arrived in the mountains, Clara didn't hesitate. Elias asked me to build a life here. She slipped the brass key into her pocket. I'm not turning back now. Nathan studied her for a moment. The frightened woman who had stepped off a broken wagon 2 days earlier was gone. In her place stood someone determined. Someone Elias had believed in. Nathan gave a quiet nod. Then let's finish what he started. the abandoned church stood on a ridge overlooking the valley. Its weathered boards groaned in the rising wind. Moonlight slipped through broken stained glass windows, casting fractured colors across the floor. From a distance, it looked forgotten. Up close, it told another story. Fresh boot prints covered the muddy ground, 2 horses waited beside the old cemetery, a lantern burned inside. Nathan motioned for Clara and Margaret to stay low as they circled behind the church. Through a cracked window, Clara saw 6 armed riders. At their center stood a tall man dressed in a black duster. His silver hair caught the lantern light. His posture was calm, almost elegant. He didn't need to raise his voice to command the room. Everyone else listened. Silas Granger. Near the altar sat an elderly man bound to a wooden chair. Though age had bent his shoulders, there was quiet strength in his face. Samuel Harper, alive. Clara understood at once why Nathan had never spoken of him. To protect him, everyone had allowed the mountains to believe he was dead. Granger paced slowly across the church. "You've hidden those papers for 20 years, he smiled without warmth. "That's a long time to carry someone else's future." Samuel remained silent. Granger sighed. "I was hoping we'd avoid this." He nodded toward one of his men. The outlaw stepped forward and struck the old man across the face. Clara instinctively moved, but Nathan caught her wrist. "Not yet." His voice was barely audible. "We get one chance." Inside the church, Samuel lifted his head. A thin line of blood marked his cheek. "You can own every acre you steal," he said calmly. "But you'll never own this valley." Granger's smile disappeared. "I already do." "No." Samuel looked directly into his eyes. "You only own what people fear losing." Outside, the wind grew stronger. The old church bell swayed gently above the roof. Nathan looked toward the bell tower. Then toward the support beams inside the church. A plan formed in his mind. He whispered to Clara, "When I move, ring the bell." She frowned. "Why?" "So everyone in the valley hears it. There isn't anyone left." Nathan gave the faintest smile. "You're about to find out." Nathan burst through the side entrance. Granger, every head turned. Before anyone could react, Nathan fired a single shot into the ceiling. The old support beam splintered, dust rained down, the outlaws scrambled for cover. Clara sprinted outside and climbed the narrow stairs to the bell tower. The ancient rope hung exactly where time had left it. She wrapped both hands around it and pulled with all her strength. The bell roared across the mountains. Once, twice, 3 times, its deep voice rolled through every valley, every canyon, every forgotten trail. Far below, another bell answered, then another. Then came something even more unexpected. Hoofbeats, dozens of them. Clara rushed to the tower window. Lanterns appeared across the mountainsides like stars coming alive from hidden cabins. Remote ranches, forest trails, families emerged from places Granger believed abandoned. Men and women rode hard toward the church, ranchers, trappers, blacksmiths, widows, former soldiers. People Samuel Harper had once helped build new lives, people who had never forgotten. Granger stepped outside just in time to see them descending from every direction. For the first time, confidence left his face. "You," he whispered, "they're gone." Samuel stood in the church doorway. "I told you, they were only waiting." Granger reached for his revolver. Nathan was faster. One clean shot struck the weapon from Granger's hand, sending it spinning across the churchyard. The remaining riders looked around, outnumbered, surrounded, one by one. They lowered their rifles. Without another shot, the fight was over. Morning sunlight spilled across the valley. For the first time in years, smoke rose from dozens of chimneys. Children laughed outside cabins once hidden in fear. Neighbors embraced as though waking from a long winter. Inside the church, Samuel unlocked a weathered wooden compartment beneath the altar. Clara used the brass key. The hidden panel opened with a soft click. Inside rested a small iron box wrapped in oilcloth. Samuel carefully unfolded its contents. Original land deeds, family records. Property maps, every document bearing the proper signatures. Every lie Granger had built his fortune upon unraveled in a single morning. Over the following weeks, the papers were carried to the territorial courthouse, where the rightful ownership of the valley was restored. Families reclaimed ranches that had been stolen, and those forced into hiding returned openly to rebuild their homes. Granger and the men who had enforced his rule were taken into custody to face justice. The valley slowly found its voice again. Summer arrived with fields of wildflowers stretching beneath clear blue skies. The ranch Elias had dreamed of no longer stood empty. Neighbors rebuilt its fences. Fresh timber replaced broken walls. Laughter filled the barn where silence had once settled. One evening, Clara stood beside the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold. She unfolded the last letter Elias had ever written. This one had never reached her. Nathan had found it among Elias' belongings after the attack. The paper had yellowed around the edges. His familiar handwriting brought tears to her eyes. If anything keeps me from meeting you, don't let grief send you home. This valley doesn't need perfect people. It only needs good ones willing to stay. If you ever meet Nathan, trust him the way I've trusted him all my life. And if these mountains ever feel like home, then perhaps they always were meant to be. Clara carefully folded the letter. Nathan walked onto the porch carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her. For a while, they simply watched the sun disappear behind the peaks. Finally, Nathan spoke. Elias would have liked seeing this place alive again. Clara smiled gently. He already did. Nathan looked at her, puzzled. She glanced across the valley where families worked together beneath the fading light. He believed it was possible. Nathan nodded. That's true. Another quiet silence settled between them. Not an awkward one, the comfortable kind shared by people who had weathered the same storm. Nathan reached into his pocket. He held out a small cloth bundle. Inside lay a simple silver ring. It wasn't new, it had belonged to Nathan's mother. I've been carrying this for years, he said softly. I never knew why. He met Clara's eyes. Now I do. Clara looked at the ring, then at the valley Elias had loved enough to give his life protecting. The future before her wasn't the one she had expected when she left Missouri. But it was one built on courage, honesty, sacrifice, and hope. She slipped the ring onto her finger. You know, she said with a warm smile, I think Elias would approve. Nathan smiled, a full, unguarded smile this time. So do I. As dusk settled over the mountains, the old church bell rang once more, not as a warning, not as a mystery, but as a promise. The valley was no longer a place people feared to enter. It had become a place worth calling home.